As you settle in for a peaceful night, let me guide you into a world where fog blankets a hidden village, shrouding its gentle folk in mystery. Here, sunlight struggles to pierce the dense mist, casting everything in muted shades. The villagers have long accepted their fate, navigating their lives by touch and memory. Yet deep within, a yearning for light stirs. Join me as we journey with them from darkness into the brilliance of a new dawn, where the promise of freedom unfolds and hope flourishes like never before. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let the magic of their adventure embrace you as you drift into a serene sleep. There was a village hidden within a world of fog. Here, even the brightest day was muted and dim, the sunlight never fully reaching the earth, as if it too was afraid of this land of endless shadows. The mist lay thick as a woolen blanket, muffling sounds and dulling colours, rendering everything grey, blurred, softened. Here, time seemed to drift in slow eddies, quiet and unhurried, as though caught in the fog's embrace and lulled to a timeless sleep. The villagers, pale as the fog itself, had grown accustomed to living this way. They were gentle folk, their movements unhurried, their voices hushed, as if even their breath might stir the fog in unwanted ways. From birth, they learned to navigate their village by touch and by memory more than by sight, tracing familiar paths by the feel of stones underfoot or the rough bark of trees. And yet, buried deep within each villager was an ache, a subtle longing that no one dared speak aloud. A yearning for light, for warmth, for colour. Sometimes the youngest children would whisper of dreams they had, where the fog parted to reveal fields of green grass or skies painted in deep, endless blue. The elders would shake their heads, dismissing these dreams as foolish fancy. But there was a wistfulness in their eyes, a shared sadness, as though they too remembered such visions from some distant past. Around fires that crackled low, the villagers told stories of a time before the fog. Old tales woven from scraps of memory, passed down through generations, spoke of a world beyond the mists, a world where sunlight touched every leaf, where rivers sparkled, and where shadows were merely fleeting guests. But those were just stories, meant to lull children to sleep. No one truly believed that such a place existed. Days stretched into weeks, and weeks into years, the village caught in a gentle monotony, cradled by the mist's soft grasp. The fog was a constant companion, seeping into every corner, shaping every life. Sometimes, on the rarest of days, a slight thinning of the mist would reveal hazy outlines of distant mountains, or the faint shimmer of stars above, only to be swallowed again, leaving behind the question, what lay beyond the fog? The villagers rarely ventured far from their valley, for those who did return often carried with them strange stories. Some spoke of voices whispering in the mist, voices that were not human, Others told of shadows shifting, appearing in places they shouldn't be, their shapes unsettling and strange. And then there were those who never returned, lost to the fog's mysterious depths, leaving behind only empty cottages and unanswered questions. But despite these strange tales, the villagers went about their quiet lives, tending to their chores, their muted songs fading quickly into the dense, muffling air. They believed, or rather, they accepted, that this was their fate. They were people of the mist, and perhaps it was meant to be this way. The fog was their protector as much as it was their prison, a force both kind and unyielding, which none dared to defy. Yet, as the seasons passed, a sense of restlessness began to grow among them, a whispering unease that settled like a weight in their hearts. It was as if the mist itself had grown weary of its own stillness, its silence no longer a comfort, but a smothering shroud. The village elders noticed it too. The fog seemed thicker, denser, harder to part, pressing closer than it ever had before. The village's world, once so vast and mysterious, was shrinking around them, as if the mist was tightening its hold. One night, as the fog lay heavier than ever upon the valley, a murmur went through the village. Someone or something had been heard outside the village's edge, a sound unlike any the villagers knew. It was a deep, rumbling noise that vibrated through the air, sending a ripple of unease through the hearts of all who heard it. Windows were bolted, doors locked, but the sound only grew louder, closer, filling the air with its weight. The villagers gathered in silence, peering out into the thick darkness, straining their eyes against the fog. And then a shadow, immense and towering, appeared at the edge of their village. A shape so vast it seemed part of the mountain itself. Eyes like twin embers glowed in the darkness, and the ground trembled beneath its footsteps. A voice, deep and ancient, rolled across the valley, reverberating like thunder. "Who walks in shadow here?" it asked, the words rumbling through the fog and filling the night. The villagers stood frozen, too afraid to speak, hearts pounding as the fog seemed to tighten around them. And yet, in the silence that followed, a flicker of hope sparked within them, a faint stirring of the old yearning they had almost forgotten. Could it be that this stranger, this towering figure, was here to answer the longing that lay hidden within their hearts? Or was he merely another phantom, a ghost conjured by the mists to haunt them? They could only wait, bound by fear and hope, as the giant's shadow loomed over their village, the promise of light hovering just beyond the reach of the fog. The dawn was grey, though it mattered little to the villagers, for every morning looked much the same. But on this day, they awoke not to silence, but to the echoes of that voice. A voice that had vibrated through their bones, its deep tones lingering in the air, as though they'd been etched into the mist itself. It was a voice that spoke of distant places an ancient wisdom, carrying with it a promise that unsettled the fog-dulled peace of their valley. When the villagers gathered near the square, hesitant and wary, their breaths hung in clouds around them, whispers blending into the mist. They spoke in hushed tones of the towering shadow they had seen at the edge of their village, a figure so vast it seemed woven from the mist itself, a giant with eyes that pierced through the fog like smouldering coals. Some claimed he was a spirit come to carry them away, while others whispered that he was a warning, a sign that they had angered the fog. But as the mist shifted, parting just enough to reveal more of the village's edge, they saw him, a towering figure, standing still as a mountain, his massive frame half concealed in the swirling fog. His eyes, dark and ancient, were fixed on the village, as though he was seeing not the buildings or the people, but something deeper, something hidden. At first, no one dared approach. The villagers hovered in clusters, clutching each other's hands, torn between fear and a curiosity that pricked like needles beneath their skin. Finally, a brave soul, a frail, bent elder with hair as white as the fog, stepped forward, her voice trembling yet steady. "Who are you?" she called, her voice barely rising above a whisper. The giant lowered his head, his gaze softening as he looked down at her. "I am Ashar, the Wayfarer," he said, and his voice rolled over them like distant thunder, rich and slow, as if each word had travelled through ages before reaching them. "I have crossed lands where shadows are banished and light is endless. I come from a realm far beyond the fog." The villagers exchanged glances, their disbelief tempered by the presence of this mysterious being whose very existence defied the laws of their mist-shrouded world. A child, no older than 7, dared to call out, his voice filled with wonder. "You come from where the light is?" His words broke the silence, echoing through the village like a bell tolling in the fog. Ashar nodded, his immense hand lifting and extending toward the mist that surrounded them. "Yes, child," he murmured. "I have seen the land where shadows flee from the sun, where the air is warm and clear, and colors dance freely, unbound by mist." His voice softened, a hint of sorrow threading through his words. "I have come to offer you passage from this place, to lead you out of the fog." A murmur swept through the crowd, a wave of emotion that neither fear nor reason could hold back. The elder who had spoken first frowned, her face creased with suspicion and doubt. "But the fog is our home," she said, her voice lined with the weight of her years. "We know only this place. To leave it would be to enter the unknown." Ashar's eyes glinted with a strange, quiet wisdom, and his voice dropped lower, carrying an almost hypnotic tone. "Your world is one of shadows," he replied, "but beyond it lies a place of peace, a land that waits for you, where warmth and light are as constant as the breath in your lungs." The villagers stared, uncertain, each heart grappling with the meaning of his words. Some clutched their hands to their chests, as if to guard the quiet ache the giant's words had stirred within them. They were people of the fog, born and raised in its cool embrace, bound to it by generations. Yet here was Ashar, a creature from realms they had only dreamed of, offering them the chance to see a world they could scarcely imagine. "Why would you do this for us?" asked a young woman, her voice trembling but her eyes resolute. "You are a stranger to us, bound to no oath or debt. Why do you wish to lead us out of the fog?" Ashar looked at her, his expression softening as if he saw not just her, but the dreams and fears of everyone gathered there. "The fog has held you for long enough," he said simply. "The world beyond waits for you, and I am but a guide, a traveler who has seen both light and shadow. It is time you see the world as it truly is, unshrouded and free." For a moment, the villagers stood silent, the weight of his words sinking into them, seeping through the mist and into their bones. Ashar's promise was like a door, one that opened to possibilities both wonderful and terrifying, a way out of the only life they'd ever known. One by one, the elders stepped forward, their faces etched with lines of both reluctance and hope. With a solemn nod, they agreed to follow Ashar, placing their trust in the giant who had come from beyond the mist. Ashar's lips curved in a faint smile, as if he had known their answer long before they themselves did. He knelt, extending his great hand as if to hold the village itself, and spoke in a voice that trembled through the fog and into their hearts. "Gather your families," he said. "Prepare yourselves. When the sun rises tomorrow, we will begin our journey to the land where the fog cannot follow." As he rose to his full height once more, the mist seemed to shift and swirl around him, cloaking him in shadows once more, a figure both real and dreamlike. And as the villagers dispersed to prepare, a spark of hope flickered within them, fragile yet unyielding, like the first glimmer of light breaking through a lifetime of shadow. The night before their journey, the village lay in an uneasy stillness, as if the fog itself had drawn close, listening, hovering with a kind of possessive jealousy. Families gathered in hushed circles, their murmured conversations barely piercing the silence. Some villagers packed small bundles of belongings, hands trembling as they tied cloth sacks filled with modest possessions. Others wandered, lost in their thoughts, fingers brushing the walls of homes they had known all their lives. There was a solemnity in their movements, a reverence, as if they were saying farewell not only to their village, but to the only life they had ever known. As the first fingers of dawn stretched through the sky, the mist seemed to tighten, thickening around the village as though reluctant to release its hold. The fog had been their world, their protector and their captor. And now, on the brink of leaving, It seemed almost alive, curling around each building and tree with an eerie familiarity. At the edge of the village stood a Shah, silent and patient, his immense figure blending with the dawn shadows. He seemed part of the fog, as if he belonged to both worlds, the realm of mist and the lands beyond. The villagers approached him cautiously, children clinging to their parents, their eyes wide with wonder and fear. The elder woman who had first spoken to Ashar looked up at him, her face marked by the weight of years, but now softened by a spark of hope. Ashar's gaze swept over them, his eyes like embers glowing in the half-light. Today, we leave behind this world of shadows, he intoned, his voice resonating with an ancient authority, as if he was speaking not only to the villagers, but to the mist itself. But the journey is not without peril. The fog will not release you easily, for it has grown used to your presence, and it will try to draw you back. The villagers shuddered, their gazes darting nervously into the depths of the fog, where shadowy shapes seemed to stir. But Ashar raised his hand, his massive palm facing the mist as if to hold it at bay. I have made a promise to lead you safely, he continued. Trust in my steps and do not falter. I will shield you from the shadows that lurk within the mist, but you must not stray from my path. There was a murmur among the villagers, a rustling like the sound of leaves stirred by the wind. Some were doubtful, clutching amulets and relics handed down through generations, as if these simple tokens could protect them from the fog's grasp. But in each heart, hidden beneath layers of fear and uncertainty, there was a flicker of hope, fragile and persistent, like the glow of a distant star. With a solemn nod, Ashar began to walk, his colossal strides measured and purposeful. The villagers followed, eyes fixed on his broad back, their steps tentative yet resolute. As they crossed the boundary of their village, the mist seemed to ripple, a wave of grey rolling around them as if it sensed their departure. Shadows shifted within the fog, whispering voices carried on the air, faint and haunting. The path ahead was treacherous, each step taking them deeper into the heart of the mist, where the fog grew thicker, coiling around them like a living thing. Strange sounds echoed from unseen places, faint calls that twisted and distorted in the fog. Some villagers thought they heard the voices of lost loved ones, calling to them from the depths, voices they had long mourned. It took all their willpower to keep their eyes on Ashar's steady figure, resisting the urge to turn, to listen, to answer those familiar calls. Ashar's voice broke through the whispers, steady and calm. The fog is testing you, he said, his tone reassuring. It knows your fears, your desires, and it will try to hold you. But the world beyond is brighter than you can imagine. Hold fast, for we are nearing its edge. As they walked, a strange thing began to happen. Small beams of light, faint but distinct, pierced through the mist in places. illuminating patches of earth beneath their feet. The villagers murmured in awe, watching as the light fought its way through the fog, shimmering with a golden warmth they had never known. Some reached out, fingers trembling as they touched the sunlit ground, their faces reflecting both wonder and disbelief. Ashar glanced back at them, his expression softened by a faint, almost sorrowful smile. "This is but a glimpse of what awaits you," he said. "But remember, the fog will grow denser before it releases its hold completely. You must trust in my promise." They continued on, moving forward with renewed determination, their eyes fixed on the slivers of light breaking through the mist. The fog thickened, its chill deepening, and more than once a villager stumbled, their confidence faltering. Yet Ashar was always there, his presence a steadying force, his eyes burning like a pair of guiding stars in the gloom. As they walked, the light grew stronger, spreading its golden fingers through the fog, illuminating the path ahead. For the first time, the villagers felt warmth against their skin, a gentle radiance that seeped into their bones, banishing the cold that had long defined their lives. When the mist grew restless, curling and darkening as if in protest, Ashar raised his hand once more, his voice rolling out like thunder. "You cannot keep them," he said, addressing the fog itself. "They are bound for the light, and you shall release them." With that, the mist trembled, its depths roiling, shadows flickering within it as if reluctant to obey. But Ashar held his ground, his gaze unwavering, his promise etched into the air between him and the fog, unbreakable and absolute. The villagers, feeling the weight of his vow, drew closer to one another, hearts pounding with the anticipation of what lay beyond the veil of mist. For the first time in generations, they dared to dream of a world unbound by shadows, and they held tightly to Ashar's promise, a promise that blazed with a light of its own, casting the fog into retreat as they pressed on towards the unknown. The fog clung fiercely to their path, wrapping itself around the villagers with an almost sentient force, as if it could sense their determination and sought to bind them tighter. With each step they took away from the village, the mist grew darker, denser, its tendrils winding around their ankles and curling into their lungs like smoke. Shadows slithered through the fog, strange, shifting forms that hovered just beyond the edge of vision, whispering words that twisted and coiled, impossible to understand yet undeniably familiar. At times, a villager would falter, their steps slowing as a flickering shape in the fog caught their eye, a figure with the face of a loved one or a long-lost friend, a voice calling their name, begging them to stay. Those who turned toward these shapes found themselves momentarily ensnared, their expressions distant, as though lost in some memory conjured by the fog itself. But each time, Ashar's presence would pull them back, his hand reaching out like a pillar of strength, his deep voice grounding them in the present. "Do not heed the whispers," he told them, his tone gentle but unyielding. "The fog holds memories of those who have come before you, those who could not escape its grip. But you are different. You have chosen the light, and the light shall guide you." With renewed resolve, the villagers pressed on, forming a line behind Ashar as he cut a path through the mist. His towering figure a solid, reassuring force against the shifting unreality around them. Every so often, he would pause, lifting his gaze to the horizon, as though seeing something they could not. His eyes would narrow, glowing with an inner fire, and the fog would seem to recoil, loosening its hold, allowing them a precious breath of clear air before closing in again. They walked for what felt like hours, maybe days, the passage of time becoming a hazy, fluid thing within the fog. But despite the unending greyness, they began to notice signs of change. The air grew warmer, the light stronger, filtering through the mist in fragmented beams that danced along the path like threads of gold. Small patches of earth began to appear, glimpses of vibrant green grass breaking through the grey. A startling shock of colour that made the villagers gasp. But the fog fought back, its grip tightening as they drew closer to the land of sunlight Asher had promised. A low, almost mournful howl rose from the depths of the mist, a sound that set their nerves on edge, prickling their skin with a chilling dread. Shadows gathered in dense clusters, forming shapes that loomed high above, dark spectres that seemed to breathe and shift, pulsing with an unnatural life. Ashar stopped, turning to face the villagers with a gaze of quiet intensity. "We are near the fog's edge," he said, his voice a calm thread in the turbulent air. "But the shadows will try their hardest here, for they know they are losing you. Stay close and let nothing sway you." A tremor of fear rippled through the villagers, but Ashar's gaze anchored them, steady as a mountain, a reminder of the world that lay just beyond their reach. With a collective breath, they tightened their ranks, their steps unified as they resumed their journey, eyes fixed on Ashar's glowing gaze. The final stretch was the hardest, the fog a roiling wall of darkness, filled with voices and visions that seemed designed to tempt them back, to make them question their choice. Some heard the voice of the mist itself, whispering in their ears, promising safety if they would only turn back, reminding them of all they would leave behind. Their homes, their past, their familiar lives. Others saw visions of endless shadowy pathways stretching into infinity, filling them with a suffocating sense of dread, as if they could never truly escape. But Ashar's voice guided them forward, his words weaving a tapestry of light, drawing them through the fog's final desperate onslaught. "Beyond this veil lies freedom," he said, his voice a resonant chord that cut through the mist. "The fog may hold you by fear, by doubt, but the light awaits. only a few more steps. As they reached the edge, the mist roared, a final, furious cry that reverberated in the air, shaking the ground beneath them. It felt as if the fog itself would swallow them whole, dragging them back into its embrace. Yet Ashar stood firm, his eyes blazing with an unearthly fire. And with one last surge of strength, he raised his arms, parting the mist with a power that seemed to reach into the very heart of the shadows. And then, as though yielding at last to a force greater than itself, the fog began to recede, curling back like smoke, rolling away to reveal a world bathed in light. The villagers gasped, shielding their eyes as the golden brilliance washed over them, flooding their senses with warmth and colour. Grass stretched out in lush fields of green, and flowers bloomed in a riot of hues, reds, blues, yellows, all vibrant and impossibly bright. The sky, vast and unbroken, was a shade of blue they had never seen, a deep, endless blue that filled them with a sense of wonder and peace. For a moment, they simply stood, breathing in the scent of the earth, the warmth of the sun on their skin, feeling as if they had been reborn. The fog was gone, nothing but a faint memory that hovered at the edge of their awareness, a shadow dissipating in the brilliance of their new world. They turned to Ashar, their expressions filled with gratitude, awe, and something akin to reverence. But the giant only nodded, his gaze resting on them with a gentle, almost paternal pride. His task was complete, his promise fulfilled. He looked to the distant mountains, his form beginning to blur, fading back into the shadows that clung to the edge of the sunlight. Before the villagers could call out, he was gone, his towering figure dissolving into the air, leaving only the faintest trace of a whisper that drifted through the breeze. Walk freely in the light. The fog will no longer hold you. The villagers stood in silence, feeling the weight of his words settle within them. They were free, free to walk in the sunlight, to live in the world they had only dreamed of, their lives forever touched by the mysterious figure who had guided them from shadow into light. And as they turned their faces to the sky, they knew that, though he was gone, Ashar would be with them always, his promise etched into their hearts, a silent guardian in their new world. The villagers lingered at the edge of the valley, eyes wide, drinking in the vastness before them. It was as if the world had been born anew, every leaf, every blade of grass touched by light, shimmering with a vibrancy they had never known. Sunlight poured over the land in waves, golden and warm, wrapping them in a gentle embrace that felt like a long-lost friend. They stood, rooted, not daring to move, for fear the scene would vanish, that it was a mirage conjured by the fog to taunt them. But as moments passed, the light only grew stronger, illuminating the fields, the mountains, and the rivers that stretched across the land. Slowly, The villagers began to wander forward, tentative steps carrying them into this strange new world, each footfall echoing in the vast silence. They had stepped into a world of color, and it was almost overwhelming. Flowers of every imaginable hue bloomed along the path, their petals opening wide to greet the sun. Trees stood tall and proud, their branches alive with leaves that danced in the breeze. A sound so gentle and pure it felt like music. Birds swooped overhead, their feathers catching the light, a burst of motion and life against the endless sky. Some villagers fell to their knees, hands pressed to the earth as if they needed to feel its solidity, to reassure themselves that this was real. Others reached out to one another, clasping hands and laughing, the sound breaking free from their throats in bursts of joy, unrestrained and wild. It was the laughter of people released from a lifetime of silence, of people who had only just remembered what it meant to be alive. A group of children ran through the fields, their bare feet brushing against the grass, their eyes wide with wonder as they explored the world that had been hidden from them for so long. They chased the sunbeams, their laughter ringing out, a high, clear sound that seemed to carry for miles. They gathered flowers, braided them into crowns, draped them over their shoulders, transforming themselves into tiny kings and queens of this new sunlit realm. The elders too walked with a newfound lightness, their steps no longer slow and burdened by the fog's weight. They gazed out over the land, eyes tracing the line of distant mountains, the curve of the river as it wound its way through the valley, glistening like a ribbon of silver. There was a quiet peace in their faces, a peace that came from knowing they had left the shadows behind. But even in their joy, a question lingered, unspoken yet shared by each heart. Where had Ashar gone? The giant who had led them, who had carried them through the darkness, was nowhere to be seen. They turned their faces to the horizon, searching for his towering figure, his steady gaze, but found only the rolling hills and the vast, open sky. One by one, they called his name, their voices rising and mingling with the wind, as if hoping he would hear and return. But the land remained silent, offering only the soft rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird. For a moment, sadness swept over them, a faint shadow in their newfound light. For they longed to thank him, to tell him that he had given them more than they could ever repay. Yet, as they looked around at the world he had led them to, they felt his presence everywhere, in the warmth of the sun, in the gentle breeze, in the earth beneath their feet. He was there, woven into the very fabric of the land, a silent guardian watching over them, his promise fulfilled. The elder woman who had first spoken to Ashar knelt in the grass, her fingers tracing the delicate veins of a leaf, her face softened by a serene smile. She closed her eyes, feeling the sunlight on her skin, and whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude to the giant who had led them to this place. In her heart, she felt his answering presence, distant yet profoundly comforting, as if he too felt the peace they now shared. As days passed, the villagers began to build their lives anew, creating homes under the wide sky, planting seeds in the fertile earth, drawing water from clear streams that ran swift and pure. They became people of the sunlight, their songs and laughter filling the valley. The memory of fog, a distant shadow that no longer held any fear. And in time, their children would ask about the life they had left behind, about the fog that had once shrouded their world in silence. The villagers would tell the tale of Ashar, the wayfarer, the giant who had come to lead them from darkness into light. They spoke of his towering figure, his quiet strength, and his promise, a promise that had carried them through the shadows and into a world beyond their wildest dreams. They built a stone monument at the valley's edge, marking the place where the mist had once held them captive. Upon it, they carved the outline of a giant, his hand outstretched, as if guiding them still. Flowers grew at its base, wild and vibrant, a tribute to the journey he had made possible. And whenever the sun cast long shadows across the valley, they would glance toward the monument, feeling his presence, a whisper in the wind, a warmth in the air. Ashar, the giant, the wayfarer, lived on in their hearts, his spirit woven into the sunlight and the peace they had found. They would walk freely in the light, forever grateful, knowing that even though he was gone, he was with them still, his promise a part of their very being, a quiet guardian watching over their lives in this land of sunlight and peace.